attendance form on this link and fill in the feedback form. Share 50 minutes before the session ends and close after 1 hour. Attendance and feedback is compulsory for these purposes. First, mandatory attendance for ITS master and doctoral students you intake. Second, certificate of participation eligible for international participants who have 80% attendance, minimum 7 meetings. And third, stamp for it eligible for ITS undergraduate students. Welcome to our Researcher and Research Student Enrichment Session on today, Thursday, the 28th of October 2021. I'm Dania from ITS Global Engagement, and today I will be your Master of Ceremony for the session of R2SEP. You are now participating in Sciences stream of R2SEP. Please do not forget to fill your attendance at the link that will be sent by our committee via the Zoom chat room. Today's lecture theme in the Sciences stream of R2SEP is titled Common Research Methodology in your field will be delivered by our speaker, Dr. Rodney, and Ms. Wirdatul Muslihati will be the one conducting today's session as our moderator. Before we start our agenda, allow me to deliver our schedule today as follows. Opening, introduction to the moderator and speaker, the lecture session, Q&A session, certificate awarding, and closing of R2SEP. Next, let me introduce our moderator for today. Our moderator today, Ms. Wirdatul Muslihatin, who is also a lecturer at the Department of Biology at ITS. Her educational background, Master of Science major on Botany, Institut Pertanian Bogor, and Bachelor of Science major on Biology, Institut Teknologi 10 November. Her academic and professional experience, lecturer and researcher, Department of Biology ITS, Head of Laboratory of Bioscience and Plant Technology, Department of Biology ITS from 2016 until 2020. Her research interest is plant structure and development, plant in vitro culture or plant tissue culture, plant macro technique, botany, economic, and algology. Now that you are informed about our moderator, without further ado, let's proceed to the main agenda. To Ms. Wirdatul, as our moderator, the time is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Dania, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Dr. Rodney Odison Rugwindin from Lyceum Northwestern University from Philippines. And good afternoon, all participants in this program. I'm Wirda from Biology Department. I'm a moderator today, and I will guide you in this program. We meet again on researcher and research student enrichment program. Okay, today I will guide you in this program, and this afternoon we have an interesting topic. The topic is common research methodology in your field, especially in science for today. Okay, I think this is an interesting and suitable topic, as we know that to conduct a good research, we need suitable methodology. And we will get more knowledge about it through this program with Dr. Rodney Odison Rugwindin. Okay, thank you, Dr. Rodney. I will call you Dr. Rodney for joining this program today. And how are you, doctor? Okay.
I'm fine, and thank you for this opportunity that you have given me to share my experiences and expertise, especially in the common methods used in common research methods used in science, particularly in health sciences, because by profession, actually, I'm a nurse, but I'll be introducing today. I'll be I'll be having a lecture today on what are different research approach, methods, and research designs that you can use later on when you will have your thesis or dissertation.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for your coming. And before your lecture, I would like to introduce Dr. Rodney Odison Reguinan, and he is from Philippines. Yeah. Rodney Odison Reguinan from Lyceum, Northwestern University from Philippines, and he obtained his doctor uh, of education in educational management, Lyceum Northwestern University, and Master of Art in Nursing. Wow, Art in Nursing, Doctor, from Lyceum Northwestern University, and Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Lyceum Northwestern University. Now he is a senior lecturer and researcher in College of Nursing, Lyceum Northwestern University, and he has his research interests, from educational. I'm sorry. His research interests are educational management, administration, and nursing, and clinical area. Okay. Okay, that is a profile of Dr. Uh, Reguindin. And now, Doctor, time is yours to deliver your lecture for an hour. Please.
Thank you very much, Miss Muslihatin, for that very nice introduction. Okay, so maybe I can start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen now? My slides?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet, Doctor.
Okay.
Yes,
how about this?
I can see your
not yet?
presentation.
Not
I can
yet.
see your presentation now.
Okay, you can see the presentation already. Okay.
Is Widodo, can you see Dr. Rodney presentation?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So good day to everyone, to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Assalamualaikum. I know a little bit of Arabic. I know how to speak a little Arabic because of my experience of teaching in Saudi Arabia for 2 years. Yes, I tried teaching there also for 2 years in one of the university in Saudi Arabia. So again, good day to everyone. Assalamualaikum. I am Rodney. I am Dr. Rodney Odison Reguindin. Actually, as of the moment, I am the Academic and Research Coordinator of Lyceum Northwestern University College of Nursing in the Philippines. First, let me thank the members of and organizers of the Research and Research Student Enrichment Program for this opportunity that they have given me. I am so delighted and honored at being chosen to share my experience and expertise in research to our participants for today. I personally believe that all participants here have the potential to be later on become global leaders in research, and being able to be a part of molding you into one is a great opportunity for me. So today, I am tasked to discuss, to have a lecture about the common research methods being used in not only in health sciences, but it is also applicable to other fields of sciences. Now, the learning outcomes for this particular lecture, at the end of the presentation, the participants will be able to differentiate the terms research approach, research methods, and research designs, distinguish the methods associated with quantitative, qualitative, and one of the trend nowadays is mixed research approach. Also, one learning outcome is to identify when to use the different research designs for quantitative, research designs for qualitative, and research designs for mixed research approaches. So this is my first question to all participants. Okay, so what is the difference between a research approach, common terms used in the field of research? Is there a difference between a research approach, a research method, or a research design, or do they mean the same thing? Okay, so when we say experimental, we hear the term experimental. Is it a research approach, or is it a type of a research method, or a type of research design? When we hear the word quantitative, quantitative or qualitative, is it a typology for research approach, research method, or research design? Or do these terms mean the same? Okay, so quantitative and qualitative, if you're aware of these terms, are these research methods or research approaches or research designs? Okay, maybe you can put your answers on the chat box. Okay, when you say quantitative or qualitative research, are these approaches, methods, or designs? So may I ask the if they will like write something or type something in the chat, will I able to see it? Okay. So when we say quantitative or qualitative research, these are actually research approaches. So in the research nomenclature, when we say research approaches, it is how the data will be treated. When we say research methods, it is how the data will be gathered. And when we say research design, it is what method will be applied in our study. So later on, we will study the different research approaches, research methods, and research design. So first, let's start with what are the different research approaches. In the first place, what is a research approach? When we say research approach refers to your plans and procedures used for a research that serves as the foundation for broad assumptions that guide your research and guides you in your methods of data collection, method of data analysis, and how you interpret your data. So when we say research approach, okay, this refers to the plans and the procedures that you use that will guide you, that will be your foundation, which means it will guide you on how will you conduct your research. How do you collect the data? How do you analyze the collected data? And how do you interpret the collected data? The selection of what type of research approach that you are going to use will be based on the nature of your research problem. It will be based on your personal experience and the audience or the participants of your study. So basically, when we say research approach, it's divided into three types. For the biology, for those who are teaching in the biology department, I think most of the research that you have an experience in are quantitative researchers under the quantitative research approach, particularly the experimental research design. But there are still two more approaches when we go to the typology of research approach. Actually, you have the quantitative research approach, qualitative research approach, and one of the common trend that is now popular is the mixed method, or you combine both quantitative and qualitative research approach. When we say quantitative research approach, okay, it is a top-down approach. When we say qualitative research approach, it's a bottom-up research approach. So first, let us discuss what do you mean by quantitative research approach. So if you're going to dissect the word quantitative from the word quantity, okay, quantity. So what does quantity means? So when we talk about quantity, it deals with numbers. So in quantitative research approach, you deal with numerical data. So if they will ask you when to use statistical analysis tools, will it be in the quantitative research or the qualitative research? For statistical methods of data analysis, it is used in the quantitative research approach. Because as I've said a while ago, when we say quantitative, it deals with numbers or numerical data. It is an approach for testing objective theories by examining the relationship among variables. So variables involved in this approach can be measured by instruments so that the numbered or the numerical data can be analyzed using your statistical procedures. Quantitative approach in research involves collecting and converting data into numerical form so that statistical calculations can be made and conclusions can be drawn. It uses a top-down approach or what we call as deductive reasoning because from general themes, you have the tendency to become specific. So the quantitative research approach uses the deductive process. So what do you mean by deductive process? It means you start with the theory, you generate hypotheses out of that theory, then you conduct a series of tests or observation, then you make your conclusions out of your observation, analysis and conclusion out of your observation in test. So it starts with the theory, followed by the creation of the hypothesis, then you conduct a series of tests or experiments, then you confirm or reject your hypothesis. You make your conclusion. That is the deductive process used in a quantitative research approach. So from theory to confirmation or rejection of your hypothesis. Okay, because we are going to compare that later on in the qualitative approach of research. How about the qualitative? So quantitative, from the word quantity, it deals with numerical data. Let's go to qualitative approach. It's the opposite of quantitative approach. It uses a bottom-up approach. Instead of using a deductive process, in the qualitative approach, it uses an inductive process. So when we say qualitative approach, we don't deal with numerical data, but rather it's an approach for exploring and understanding the meaning or the lived experiences of individuals or groups ascribed to a social or human problem. Researchers who use this approach uncovers the deeper meaning and significance of human behavior and their experience. What are their beliefs? What are their emotions? So when we talk about these topics, this is an example of a research using the qualitative approach. So compared to the quantitative approach of research, methods used in the qualitative approach are more open-minded, are more exploratory. They are less structured compared to quantitative. Okay? And when it comes to the participants of your study, compared to the quantitative approach, because in the quantitative approach, you need a minimum number of participants or minimum number of sample to represent the whole population. And you have ways to compute that. Okay, so let me repeat that. In quantitative, we're dealing with numerical data. In quantitative, you need to compute for the minimum sample of participants that will represent the whole population. But for qualitative, it involves a smaller number of participants. In qualitative research, you don't have to compute for the minimum number of participants, but rather data gathering in qualitative research approach is based on the principle of data saturation. So what do you mean by principle of data saturation? For example, you are conducting a qualitative research. Then you conduct interviews to determine their lived experiences. Okay, for example, one of my undergraduate students conducted a qualitative research about the lived experiences of nurses taking care of COVID-19 patients. So she asked me, what's the minimum number of my participants? I told her, you don't have to compute. When you're conducting a qualitative research, you don't have to compute for the minimum number of participants, but rather it depends on the principle of data saturation. So what do you mean by principle of data saturation? It means that you will interview, okay, you will conduct interview for qualitative research, and when you are conducting your interview, it seems that the last few interviewees or last few participants of your study are already saying the same things, or they're telling you their experiences, and it's the same as those you have interviewed before them. So it's the same. Their answers are the same. For example, you have interviewed already 15 nurses taking care of COVID patients. The 16th participants, 17th, 18th participants, they're saying the same thing as the first participants that you have interviewed. That means that you can stop gathering data because you have already reached the point of data saturation. There's no point of continuing your interview because they are saying the same thing. In qualitative approach, when you gather data, okay, the amount of participants depends on the point of data saturation. Compared to quantitative approach, in quantitative, the amount of sample or the amount of participants depends on the minimum sample size that you will compute. That will represent eventually the whole population. Okay, so numerical, quantitative. When we talk about lived experiences, qualitative. Qualitative approach, okay, is like somewhat opposite to the quantitative approach in the sense that it uses the inductive process. If in the quantitative research approach, you begin with a theory, you formulate your hypothesis. Out of the hypothesis, you test it, then you make conclusions. That's the deductive process for quantitative. In qualitative approach, it's the opposite. You start with your observations, interviews, or tests. You generate patterns, themes, sub-themes. Out of this, the end result, the end product will be a theory. So as you can see, it's opposite. For quantitative, you start with the theory. For qualitative, you end up with creating a theory. Okay. So let us compare quantitative and qualitative approach. For quantitative, you test a theory. For qualitative, you generate a theory. For quantitative, it is oriented to cause and effect. For qualitative, it is oriented to discovery and exploration of the lived experiences of individuals. One more difference between the two, you have how to do it. What are the procedures involved? In quantitative, I know most of you are in the field of biology. When conducting experiments, which is a design under the quantitative approach, you have a predetermined design. You have steps to follow. That's for quantitative. For qualitative, qualitative research approach doesn't have a predetermined design, but rather it has an emergent design. So what do you mean by emergent design? If it is in quantitative, you have a structured design. You have to follow step 1, 2, 3, 4. In qualitative, emergent design refers to the ability to adapt to new ideas, new concepts, and new findings that arise while conducting the qualitative research. In contrast to quantitative, which uses a structured approach, in qualitative, an emergent design welcomes unanticipated information, therefore often adding to the richness of the data. Okay, so these are the differences when it comes to procedures between the quantitative and the qualitative approach. In the quantitative approach, it emphasizes on things that can be measured. That's why we have structured tests, structure steps, because in quantitative, we emphasize on things that can be measured. In qualitative, we emphasize on the meanings. We emphasize on the emotions. We emphasize on the lived experiences of our participants. In quantitative, okay, they say that the researcher is more objective. Why? Because the researcher distances himself from the data, and the researcher relies on standardized or structured protocols. Not like in qualitative, the researcher is close to the data. The researcher is the research instrument. Why is it that the researcher is the research instrument in the qualitative research approach? Because it's the researcher who conducts the interview in order to determine the lived experiences of the participants. For example, what are you're going to conduct as an example of a qualitative research? You're going to conduct a research to determine what are the experiences of COVID-19 patients being isolated in their homes during the period, or rather in facilities during the period of their isolation. So you will ask them, you will conduct interview, maybe through online, okay, for safety reasons. So you will ask them, what are your experiences? They will tell you their challenges. They will tell you how do they cope with these challenges that they have encountered. Okay, so qualitative research approach. Okay, so quantitative, it emphasizes on replication. It analyzes your variables. Okay, so you know this, the different variables in your research, right? So what are the variables in your research? Let's just have a review. Usually you have your independent variable, right? And the dependent variable. So for quantitative research, it analyzes the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. So let's just have a review. When we say independent variable, is it the cause or the effect? When we say dependent variable, is it the cause or the effect? So I often use this mnemonic to my undergraduate students in research, even in my master's students in research. I use the mnemonic ICE. Sir, what do you mean by ICE? So I won't get confused. Independent variable is your cause, while the effect is your dependent variable. So if there's a particular research study that analyzes the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, definitely it's a quantitative approach research. The use of statistics and conduct of experiments, quantitative. But if you use the naturalistic approach, what do you mean by naturalistic approach? When we say naturalistic approach, okay, its naturalistic observation is a non-experimental type of observation. It is used in qualitative research method. In this approach, the organisms, the participants are studied in their natural setting. There is no manipulation of the environment. Because sometimes in experimental design, in quantitative research approach, you manipulate the environment. But for qualitative research, you don't manipulate the environment. There's no manipulation of the environment involved in naturalistic observation. You just observe the participants in their natural setting. So that's qualitative approach using the naturalistic observation method. How about the formulation of hypothesis? Where do you formulate hypothesis? Do you formulate hypothesis in the quantitative research approach, or do you formulate hypothesis in the qualitative research approach? Okay. So when we formulate hypothesis, usually we are conducting the quantitative research approach. In quantitative research, hypotheses are used. In qualitative, you don't use hypothesis, but rather inquiries only use research questions. So again, if you hear the term hypothesis, it means you are conducting a quantitative research. Okay, not a qualitative one. We don't use the term hypothesis in qualitative. So let's just have a review again. When we say hypothesis, okay, hypothesis is defined as an educated, academic, or scientific guess. When we say hypothesis, it can be classified as your null hypothesis and your alternative hypothesis. So what's the difference? If you state a hypothesis, for example, your hypothesis, there is no relationship, there is no relationship between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. There is no relationship between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. That is an example of a null hypothesis, because a null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between your two variables, or between the variables that you are studying in your research. Okay, null. So the technique is null, NU, null, no relationship between the two variables, between the variables that you are studying. Okay, there's no relationship. For example, there's no relationship between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. That's an example of a null hypothesis. How about an alternative hypothesis? So actually, this is represented as, okay, in symbol, di ba? In right, in alternative hypothesis, it's in symbol, it's like this. You have here alternative hypothesis. If null hypothesis states that there is no none, no relationship, null. In alternative hypothesis, this type of hypothesis says that there's a relationship between the variables. So alternative hypothesis, if in null hypothesis there's no relationship, in alternative hypothesis there is a relationship between, for example, you state your hypothesis in this way. There is a relationship between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. That's an example of an alternative hypothesis. Your alternative hypothesis is furtherly subdivided into your directional hypothesis and your non-directional hypothesis. So, sir, what's the difference between a directional and non-directional hypothesis? Non-directional alternative hypothesis. So if you just say there is a relationship between smoking and lung cancer, that's a non-directional alternative hypothesis. You just state that there is a relationship. But if you state your hypothesis this way, smoking increases. So there's a direction. Smoking increases lung cancer, the risk of having lung cancer. That is your directional alternative hypothesis. Okay, because see, it says it increases. There's a direction. That's a directional alternative hypothesis. So going back, when we hear the term hypothesis, therefore we are talking about quantitative research. We don't use the term hypothesis in qualitative research. How about variables? Okay, I've already explained that a while ago. Variables. We study the relationship between variables. Independent, is there a relationship between the independent or the cause variable and the effect variable or the dependent variable? When we study the relationship between two variables, definitely you are conducting a quantitative research. We don't use the term variable in qualitative research. Okay, how about theory? I've already explained this a while ago. When you start from a theory, you generate hypothesis from the theory, you test your hypothesis, that's quantitative. But if you, from your themes and sub-themes generated, create a theory out of that, your final product will be a theory, that's qualitative research. So in quantitative research, you start with a theory. In qualitative research, you end up generating a theory. So testing theory. In order for you to test a theory, you should use the quantitative research approach. In order for you to generate a theory, use the qualitative research approach. Okay. How about when it comes to the type of questions that you use? Which approach uses open-ended questions? Which approach uses closed-ended questions? Okay. In quantitative research, usually you use the closed-ended questions. In qualitative research, you use open-ended questions. For example, you will ask a COVID-19 patient, or okay, let's go to the academe, to the field of education. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, so we shifted to remote learning, online learning, just like what we are doing now. So if you're going to conduct a research about the experiences of faculty members in conducting online learning, they will tell you all their challenges. They will tell you what did they do in order to cope with the challenges they have encountered. So they will say, poor internet connection. I am not that techy. So if you ask them what are their experiences, you ask them what are their experiences in live experiences in conducting online teaching. It's an open-ended question. You let them verbalize, because you let them verbalize, you let them express their or tell their experiences, express their feelings regarding online teaching. So that's an open, you ask them open-ended questions, and open-ended questions are used in qualitative research, not like in quantitative research, right? For example, you will let, how challenging is online learning? Then you will let them, in a 5-point Likert scale, you will let them rate how challenging it is. 5 very challenging, 1 not challenging. So this is a more close-ended question, because they don't verbalize themselves. They have to select from the options that you have given them. And in this case, so you ask them, how challenging is online education, online teaching? You have to rate it from 5 to 1. 5 as the most challenging, 1 means not challenging. So they don't verbalize. They don't share their experiences. It's more of a closed-ended question. And if you do this, you are doing a quantitative research. Okay? How about, what research approach seeks to measure the differences and the magnitude of these differences? It's quantitative research. How about mixed method? So basically it means mixed method. You just mix, you combine quantitative and qualitative research approaches. The good thing about mixed method is it uses both the strength of qualitative and quantitative research approach. It's a combination of both approaches that we have discussed earlier, and it allows the researcher to better understand the research problems than either of the approach alone. So now let's go to the research method. So we are done with research approaches. You have your quantitative, qualitative, and mixed research approaches. Now let's go to research methods. Okay, so what are the research methods? So in this typology, you have your historical research. When we say historical research, you gather retrospective data. So what do you mean by retrospective data? From the word history, historical research. You gather retrospective data. So what do you mean by retrospective data? From the keyword retro, which means looking backward, looking at the past, looking backwards in the past. It involves people in the field of nursing and medicine. For example, retrospective data like involves people who already have the disease in the past, and you analyze these two groups of people, those with disease under study and those with very similar to the group of people that don't have the disease. You look at their records. Okay, so retrospective data. How about in experimental? You don't look at the records because it deals with prospective data. In experimental, what do you mean by prospective data in the first place? So when we say prospective data, if in retrospective, you go backward. In prospective, you look forward. Retro, backward. You look at the records of the patients who already have the disease. In experimental, prospective data. Prospective means you go forward. What do you mean by going forward in the future? It means the researcher enrolls the participants into the study before they develop the disease or before you give a particular intervention. So in experimental research, it deals with prospective data. In descriptive research methods, it deals with current data. For example, you do surveys to gather data. That's an example of a design under the descriptive research method. Okay, so we start with descriptive research. So what do you mean by descriptive research? Descriptive research deals with the relationship between variables, the testing of hypotheses, and the development of generalizations, principles of theories that has universal validity. So if you conduct a study that deals with the relationship of your variables, this is a type of a descriptive research. So what's the difference between a descriptive research and an experimental research? In experimental research, okay, same as descriptive research, you study certain variables. But in experimental research, these variables are carefully controlled and manipulated. You manipulate the variables in experimental research. For example, you give them a particular intervention. So you manipulate the variables, you manipulate the environment, you manipulate the variables in experimental research. How about historical research, which deals with, okay, retrospective data? So from the word history, historical research, it describes what happens in the past. It involves analyzing, recording, interpreting events from the past to discover generalizations that are helpful in understanding the past, the present, and in limited extent, you can anticipate the future. Okay, so historical research, process of analyzing events or records from the past. Now, let's go to research design. So, what are research design? We're done with research approach, research methods. We go to specific research designs. When we say research designs, it determines how the chosen method will be applied to answer the research question. For all research approaches, again, what are the research approaches? You have quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. So these are your three approaches. Each research approach has their own, they have their own or different research designs. We start with quantitative research design. Quantitative, numerical data, use of statistics. What are the designs under quantitative research? For quantitative approach, the first, okay, under descriptive research method, you have survey studies, okay, interrelationship studies, and developmental studies. First, survey studies. So definitely when you conduct a survey, it's a design, it's a research design under the quantitative research approach. Okay, so survey studies. So for example, you're going to conduct a research to determine how much of the population already have been vaccinated with COVID-19. How many were not vaccinated? So these are examples of survey studies. Okay, studies that involves large and small populations by selecting samples, and you do this in order to discover, okay, the relative incidence and the distribution or central tendency and variability of your variables. Okay, so conducting a survey definitely is a research design under your quantitative research approach. Okay. Another thing, interrelationship studies. If in survey design, your main goal is to know the incidence, like how many percent of the population was affected by COVID-19, how many percent of the population is already vaccinated. These are survey studies. Compared to interrelationship studies, when we say interrelationship, from the word relationship, in this particular research design, you want to know, you want to discover the relation, if there's a relationship between two or more variables being studied in your research. For example, is there a relationship between the increased mortality rate and the number of comorbidities? Which means you want to determine, does it mean that the more sickness that you have, comorbidities, the higher your risk to become a critically ill COVID-19 patient? More diseases that you have, more risk of developing the more risk that you become severe or critically ill with COVID-19. These are interrelationship studies. How about developmental design? Okay, so when we say developmental design, from the word development, it's used for investigating the characteristic of children as they change with growth and development. So sometimes they call it as genetic studies. And the next is very familiar, a quantitative research design, especially for those who are in the field of biology, your experimental research design. So when we say experimental research design, it seeks to determine the specific treatment, how a treatment influences an outcome. In your experimental research design, it may include an experimental group where you're going to give the treatment or intervention and a control group. Okay. So, what are the types of experimental design? You have your, in my reference, you have the control group design and you have the single group design. So when we say control group design, so basically this type of experimental research design have two groups. You have the experimental group, wherein you're going to give them the intervention or the treatment. Then you have the control group, wherein there's no treatment or intervention. And later on, you're going to compare the data from your experimental group to the control group. Okay, so there's, when you say control group experimental research design, there's an experimental group, and there where you're going to give the medication, where you're going to give the intervention, and there's a control group wherein you're not going to give the intervention, and eventually you try to measure or to compare the data between the experimental group and the control group. How about single group designs? So when we say single group designs, there is no control group, because this particular research design is being used when a control group is not possible. So all you have to do is to get one group, you gather data before giving the intervention, you give the intervention or medication, then you gather data after the intervention. An example is, there's one university here in the Philippines, they have studied on the effect of papaya leaves. Papaya is a fruit. I think also it's present in your country. Papaya, like what they did is the leaf extract, the extract from the leaves of a papaya. What they did is they give it to mice. Then they measured it, the platelet level. So they measured the platelet level of the animal before giving papaya leaf. So measure your platelet level, give papaya leaves, then they measured again the platelet level after giving the intervention. And according to their study, there's a significant increase in the platelet count of that particular animal. Okay, so it's only a single it's only a single group experimental design. There is no control group to compare the platelet results from. Okay, so single group design. Next, you have your quasi-experimental design. So, sir, what's the difference between a true experimental design and a quasi-experimental design? So, in quasi-experimental design, it's somewhat similar to the true experimental design, but in quasi-experimental design, the independent variable is not manipulated. Another difference between a true experimental design and a quasi-experimental design. In quasi-experimental design, there is no random pre-selection process. Okay. So, for example, I'll give you a scenario. So, to differentiate true experimental from quasi-experimental. Now, for example, my students before studied the effects of e-cigarette. Okay, because here in the Philippines, okay, many of our youth use e-cigarette or electronic cigarette. So they want to determine the effect of e-cigarette to the blood pressure of the male individuals. Okay, so what did they do? They look for individuals who are using e-cigarette. They measured their BP, and they look for individuals who are like using the traditional cigarette, the tobacco cigarette, and they measured their BP. Then they compared the blood pressure between those who are using e-cigarette from those who are using the conventional tobacco cigarette. And there's no significant difference. The rise, the blood pressure have risen, but there's no significant difference. It's the same. You use an e-cigarette, you use a tobacco cigarette, the rise in your BP is basically the same. That's the result of their study. So as you can see, there's no random pre-selection. What I mean is, instead of, for example, instead of choosing 100, no, instead of choosing 100 individuals, 50 will be given e-cigarette, 50 will be given the traditional cigarette. There's no random selection like that. But what they did is they look for those who are already using e-cigarette, and they look for 50 who are using the conventional cigarette. So there's no random pre-selection process. You purposely select your participants. So that's quasi-experimental, not like an experimental. For example, you will conduct this through a true experimental research design. So if you will conduct this research to a true experimental research design, what you're going to do is you select 100, then randomly 50 will be given e-cigarette, 50 will be given the conventional cigarette, then you try to compare between the two. Okay, so there's random selection. In true experimental, there's random selection. Okay. In quasi-experimental, there's no random pre-selection. In true experimental, variables are manipulated. In quasi-experimental, variables are not manipulated. So that's the difference. Okay. How about analytical research design? So when we say analytical research design, the researcher has to use facts or information that is already available. And out of this information that is already available, you have to analyze them and make your critical evaluation. It involves in-depth study and evaluation of an available information. Analytical research design is concerned with testing hypotheses and specifying and interpreting relationships by analyzing the facts or information which is already available. So you just analyze information, deep analysis of an information that is already available. Okay. One type of your analytical research design is your cohort study. So what do you mean by the term cohort? A cohort, the term cohort means cohort is a defined group. Like when we say nurses, it's a cohort, 10 to 19 years old. Those who belong to the 10 to 19 years old age group, It's a cohort. It's a defined group, or college students, group of faculty members. It's a cohort. Okay, which means participants are chosen for a reason rather than randomly. Okay, there's a particular criteria in order for them to become it's a selected group. It's a defined group. You call it a cohort. Okay. So for example, an example of a cohort study is you have a group of smokers, then you have a group of non-smokers. Then over the time, you have to monitor them. Then you have to compare, out of these smokers, how many develop lung cancer? Out of these non-smokers, how many develop lung cancer over the extended period of time? So this is an example of a cohort study. How about a case control study? So when we say a case control study, okay, in cohort study, you are concerned with the frequency of the disease in exposed and non-exposed individuals. In case control, you are more concerned in the frequency and amount of exposure of subjects rather than the frequency of disease. Okay? So for example, you have cancer patient. So you try to now study. You go back. Okay? How much is the amount of exposure of these subjects had before they develop cancer? So that's an example of a case control study. How about meta-analysis? So meta-analysis means it's a research design which combines the statistical results of several studies. So for example, like how effective is Sinovac as a COVID-19 vaccine? So there are already research studies done in other countries. Even in your country, in our country, maybe there are already studies done on the effectiveness of Sinovac as a COVID-19 vaccine. So what you're going to do if you're going to do a meta-analysis on the effectiveness of Sinovac, you get the data maybe from a study done in the United States about the effectiveness of Sinovac. You get a data from a study conducted in Canada or somewhere in the Middle East, conduct another study about Sinovac, effectiveness of Sinovac conducted in Europe, in the Philippines, in Indonesia. Then you combine the statistical results of these studies, you combine the data, then you do your own analysis. So you basically, you combine the findings of different research studies and subject it to statistical analysis, then create your own conclusion and state your analysis. So that's a meta-analysis research design. Okay. Okay, how about qualitative? Let's go to qualitative. Again, for qualitative research designs, it's more on the lived experiences of individuals. Okay. In qualitative research design, you have phenomenological research design, case study, grounded theory, narrative inquiry, and ethnography. So what is phenomenology? So the keyword that you have to remember when you hear the word phenomenological research design under qualitative research, in phenomenological research design, the keywords are you are studying the lived experiences of individuals. Lived experiences. Okay. How does this group of people experience the said phenomenon? So phenomenology. Like one example of a phenomenological research, as I've stated a while ago, what are the lived experiences of COVID-19 patients being isolated in a facility? So they will tell you their challenges. They will tell you their problems. They will tell you their, how did they cope? Okay. What else? Lived experiences of professors in online teaching. This is phenomenological research. You don't deal with numerical data, but rather you ask, what are their experiences? Okay. So that's phenomenological research. So when do you use it? So basically, as I've told you a while ago, it's used to know the lived experiences of individuals that are unique and largely unstudied. Okay. How about case study? In case study, okay, it's based on an in-depth investigation of a single individual, group, or event to explore the cause and in order to find the underlying principles. So, for example, we have a patient who died of COVID-19, but besides from having COVID-19, he developed a lung problem known as pulmonary embolus. Okay, or for example, we had a case study before about professors in our university being cyberbullied. Okay, so we explored the cause. Why is it that many of our professors are being posted in social media, humiliated? Okay, a case study on the cyberbullying of professors in our university. So we conduct a case study about that. Okay, so case study. How about grounded theory? Okay, in grounded theory, it's almost the same as phenomenological research. You determine the lived experiences of these individuals. You conduct interviews. But in grounded theory, okay, there are, compared to phenomenological research, there are multiple stages of data collection and refinement, because eventually, after you have gathered your data, you have to generate a theory out of the data that you have gathered. Okay, for example, we have conducted a grounded theory research. Sorry if I have to extend at least 5 minutes. Sorry. Okay, so in grounded theory, so for example, we have created a grounded theory research on how to teach Generation Z students. How to teach Generation Z students. Like, I know most of you are professors here. You post challenges. You encountered challenges when teaching Generation Z students. So we interviewed professors. Oh, what are the problems you encounter when teaching Generation Z students? They say, oh, they always want to be active. They have short attention span. So how do you cope with this? So after a series of multiple stages of data collection, we created our own theory, our own model on how to teach Generation Z students. How about narrative inquiry? In narrative inquiry, the study participants are asked in long interviews to give a detailed account of their story. So compared to phenomenological research, in narrative inquiry, okay, in narrative inquiry, you just let the participants through long interviews give a detailed account of what happened, of their story. So what are the examples of your narrative inquiry? You have biographic study. You have the autobiography of an individual. You'll conduct a research in narrative inquiry on the autobiography of an individual, the life history, or the oral history. How about ethnography? So the keyword for ethnographic research, ethnography, is you study, okay, the culture of a group of individuals. It's a multi-method qualitative design that studies people in their natural occurring settings, studying their beliefs, their language, their culture. An example of an ethnographic study that my students have conducted is they studied the cultural beliefs of Filipinos who had just given birth. I know in Indonesia, and for other students who are international students, they came from a particular country of origin. You have your own cultural beliefs that you practice after giving birth. So what did my students did? They observed a particular locality in the Philippines about their culture. What do they do after giving birth? What are their cultural beliefs after giving birth? Now, some of the mothers after giving birth here in the Philippines, they found out they don't take a bath because they believe if they take a bath immediately after giving birth, So what happens? They say it will slow down the healing process. What else? They use several herbal medications such as guava leaves in our country. They use that. What else? They avoid certain foods because they believe in their culture it will again slow down the process of recovery. So ethnography, any study that deals with culture. Okay, so the last, we already have, I think, last 5 slides, your mixed method. So mixed method research designs, you have your sequential explanatory, sequential exploratory, concurrent and concurrent triangulation, and concurrent nested. So what do you mean by sequential explanatory design? So the keyword is sequential, sequence. You don't gather quantitative and qualitative data at the same time. You gather them one by one. Use in sequential explanatory design. You start gathering quantitative data, then after gathering your quantitative data, you gather your qualitative data, then you interpret your results. So it's in sequence. You don't gather both data at the same time. You start with quantitative, then qualitative, then you interpret the data. So why is it explanatory? Why is it? It's sequential in the sense that you start with quanti, then you gather quali. Why is it explanatory? It's like this. For example, an example of a sequential explanatory design. For example, I will ask the instructors, how challenging is online teaching? So they will say, oh, 5, it's very challenging. Some instructors say it's 3. Some instructors says, oh, 2, we are techie. We can cope with online teaching. So this is quantitative data, gathering quantitative data. Afterwards, you will ask them, those who answered 5, you don't have to interview all of them, but you select some participants who answered 5. Why is it that you answered 5? Why is it you consider it challenging? So that's already interview. You're already asking why is it challenging. That's qualitative data. So the qualitative data will explain your quantitative data. So that's sequential explanatory design. So those who answered 2 or 1, so you ask them, why is it? You answered, it's not challenging. So maybe they will tell you, oh, I belong to the younger generation. I can cope with online learning. Okay, so sequential explanatory design. Quanti before quali. How about sequential exploratory design? In exploratory design, it's the opposite of explanatory. You start with qualitative, then quantitative, then you interpret. So how do we do that? For example, you want to conduct a study on the different challenges of online teaching. So the first thing you have to do, you have to interview. You have to ask this professors, what are the challenges that you encountered in conducting online learning? So they will tell you, oh, these are the problems. My internet at home is very slow. I'm not that techy. Okay, I have no experience in using Zoom or Google Classroom. So you conduct an interview first. If you conduct an interview to ask them about their challenges, that's qualitative data. Then out of the challenges that they have enumerated, you will create now your survey questionnaire. So your survey questionnaire will be based on the results of your interview. When you conduct now your survey, that's already quantitative research. But where did you get the contents of your survey? From the interview during the qualitative research phase. So qualitative, out of that, you create your material for quantitative, then you interpret. Okay, that's sequential exploratory. How about concurrent triangulation? So concurrent triangulation means it's used to validate your quantitative data. For example, the researcher uses a survey to assess the people's self-reported food safety practices. So you conduct a survey about self-reported about safety practices in food preparation. Okay. At the same time, you gather qualitative data, you observe their actual practices. Now you compare. Okay, you compare quantitative and qualitative data. Is there a match between what people think based on your survey from what you are or actually observing? So that's concurrent triangulation. Triangulate means you validate quantitative data by qualitative data. You validate what they have answered from the survey. You validate what they have answered from the survey by your own observations, qualitative data. Concurrent triangulation. Then the last, you have your concurrent, okay, this will be the last slide, your concurrent nested. So what do you mean by concurrent nested? Nesting means you embed a method to address a different question. Okay, for example, one of my students also conducted a research about depression of COVID-19 patients. So in order to determine if the patient have depression, she will use a research instrument. And that instrument is under, if you use a research instrument, okay, to determine depression, that's under quantitative data collection. So there are questions at the first part of the questionnaire about that the COVID-19 patients will answer. And out of these questions, their answers, you will determine whether there's a scoring to determine whether they have depression or not. Okay, so that's quantitative data. They will rate themselves. How do they feel for the past few days? And out of the scores, you will determine if they have depression or not. That's quantitative data. The second part of the questionnaire, there's a question there. What do you do, or how do you cope, or what do you do when you are depressed? If you will ask that question, that's qualitative data. But this question is not similar to this, because this part determines whether the patient has depression or not, while this part determines how do they cope with depression. So you nest it, you combine. Okay, so concurrent nested. Okay, so anyway, these are my references for this particular presentation. Okay, so again, thank you very much for your time. Okay. So thank you very much. So if you have questions, so feel free to ask our moderators, or feel free to put it in the chat box.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Ragwindin, for your amazing lecture, and it is give us inspiration and important information. And from your lecture, I get the important note that to get good result of the research, we must choose research approach, research method, and then a research design. And it must be suitable one that we choose. Is it right, Doctor?
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
Okay.
The type of methodology and approach that you're going to use will be based on your research problem. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. And now we are on Q&A session. We have 3 minutes for Q&A session. And before I read the question on chat room or question form, please raise your hand on your camera to ask directly to Dr. Ragwindin, and we limit only for 3 participants. Okay.
Yeah.
For the first is Edo Ranidlian. He is from biology department.
Oh.
Edo, that is
Yes.
yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Wirda. My name is Edo Ranidlian. I'm registered as a master student in biology department. I have 2 questions related to the topic right now. The first one is, let's say that we are going to evaluate the differences between 2 groups, and we're going to use the hypothetical testing using a student t-test. let's say after the statistical analysis, we get that there is no difference between two groups, meaning that we fail to reject null hypothesis, right? Is there any way to get to know that we get the type 2 errors, or that's the real results of our experiment? And the second question is related to the correlation test. As we know that the correlation doesn't imply the causation, how to get to know, or is there any way to get to know, to get the validation of explanation between those two variables? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Edo. Dr. Ragunin, would you answer directly, please?
Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit confused. So can we like divide the question into two? Like we answer the first question first, then so we can focus on it. Then we go to the next question. So what's your, anyway? Nice to meet you,
Edo.
Edu, from the biology department. So what's your first question, Mr. Edu?
My first question is, let's say we want to evaluate the differences between two groups, and we want to test it using a student t-test. And let's say a student t-test.
Okay, a t-test. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. To know the significant difference between the results between two groups. Okay.
And how to get to know that we fall to the type 2 question, or that's the real results of our experiment.
So how to determine the
as far as I understand, that if we fail to reject null hypothesis, there's two possibilities. That the first possibility is we fail to reject null hypothesis and we get a type 2 error, and the second one is that's the real results of our experiment. How to determine which one is true?
Which one? That's true.
Yes, Ibu Werda.
Okay.
Do we have to repeat
I'm sorry.
our?
Okay. So wait. Okay, you're going to use a t-test to determine if there's a significant difference between the two results, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what you have said also, and that's correct. So then the next is, how do you determine?
Let's say we have we get the p-value that shows that we don't have any significant difference between two groups, meaning that we fail to reject null hypothesis, right? And meaning that might be have a type 2 error, or that's the real results of our experiment. So how to get to know which one is the true reality of our research? That's I get a confusion from that.
Okay. Actually, can you help me with the question? Can you rephrase the question for me? So in my own knowledge, it's the difference between type 1 and type 2 error. So when we say type 1 error, it's the mistaken reduction of an actually true hypothesis, right? Or it's also known as your false positive finding or conclusion.
Yes.
Well, type 2 error is mistaken acceptance of the actually false null hypothesis, or it's also known as false negative.
Yes, it is. And how to get to know that we get an error, or is that a real results of our experiment? Or do we have to recreate our experiment, or how to do the interpretation to validate our results?
Okay, so much of now when we conduct this test, so most statistical theory evolves on with minimizing this both type of errors, though we cannot completely eliminate either statistical possibility if the outcome is not determined by a known or observable causal process. So how do we avoid these errors? If I have understood your question correctly, so by selecting a low threshold, or a cutoff value, and modifying the alpha level, now there's a possibility that the quality of your hypothesis test using t-test can be increased. increase. Okay. So actually, up to now, I'm maybe you can help me with this because I cannot fully understand the question, but anyway, thank you for asking me that question. I'll try to look over that because I apologize. I thought it's somewhat related to methodology, but I think it's more on how do you apply statistical tests such as t-test and eliminate type 1 and type 2 errors. Okay, so it will be like this. I will entertain your question. I'll do an additional research about that because it's more on how to eliminate type 1 and type 2 errors. So for the organizers, can I have his email? So I'll make a research about that and to further answer and enlighten him about that particular question. I can send him a personal email after I have done my additional research about his question.
Okay.
Because I think it's somewhat more related rather than the methodologies of research and approaches. Is more related on how to eliminate type 1 and type 2 errors, which is using t-test. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, and I'll just get your personal email.
Okay, Edo, it's your opportunity to contact Dr. Raguindin. Okay.
Okay,
The other
thank you.
question.
Okay.
Thank you, Edo. And the other question, please feel free to ask a question. Okay, I will choose. Maybe Tias, you have a question for to Dr. Raguindin?
Actually, I have one question about ethnography, Dr. Rodney.
Yes, ethnography. Okay.
What I'm gonna ask is how to avoid a bias in ethnography research, since when we conduct ethnography research,
Yes.
we have to blending with the
and observe for a extended period
and
of time.
how to
you have
avoid
to like
bias.
observe.
Yes.
So
how to avoid bias while we having collecting the data from the object.
Okay.
Okay. So your question is how to minimize bias. Okay.
Yes.
While conducting ethnography, or because yes, I understand you are correct that when you conduct ethnography, right, you sometimes blend in, like you become a part of the community.
Correct, Dr. Redney.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mbak Tias. Mbak Tias is a committee. I'm sorry, Mbak Tias.
It's okay, Bu Wiratna.
Thank you so much for your participation.
Okay.
Discussion. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very good question. How do you avoid bias in conducting ethnography? Okay, so how do you avoid bias, especially if you live there, like because there are many types of ethnographic research. One is
Problem with connection.
I think Dr. Rodney's connection is a bit unstable. While we are waiting for him, maybe if the participant have any other question.
Dr. Raguindin. Nah, okay.
Dr. Rodney?
Okay.
Sorry, I think I have a connection problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. It's okay, Doctor.
Okay. So how do you avoid bias in an ethnographic study? Okay. So how do you become like objective? Okay. Now, sometimes when you conduct ethnography, there's one way that you will do a covert observation, which means when you like when you're observing, you're gathering data, the the respondents, no, the respondents like covert, because the respondents don't know that you are gathering, you are already gathering data. But there's a particular ways to, despite of being not telling them that you are gathering a data, there are steps in research ethics that you have to follow, no, in order to still conduct your study, be you collecting data, no, ethically, despite that the participants of your study doesn't know that you are collecting data. uh I think other ways to uh actually that's one. If we're going to look at if you're going to compare quantitative research approach from qualitative research approach, quantitative is more objective because it uses a structured steps in conducting it, and it has a lesser bias. That's one advantage of quantitative. Ethnography falls under qualitative research. Ethnography is a research design under qualitative research. So yes, you are correct. Like, it's in qualitative research, that's one disadvantage of qualitative research. That's one weakness of qualitative research, is that when you conduct qualitative research such as ethnography, there is really a possibility that you will have, there's more possibility that you're going to have a bias compared to conducting a quantitative, or for example, experimental type of research. In experimental type of research, it's, if you're going to follow the steps one by one, you're going to use standardized instruments, it's very difficult to be biased. Not like in qualitative research, ethnography, or phenomenological research, there's a bigger possibility of you becoming biased, particularly if you're a participatory researcher, which means you participate, for example, in ethnography, you participate in the cultural activities of these people in order to gather more data. So you have maybe the tendency to become biased compared to conducting a quantitative research study. But one way to now, it's up to the researcher. So if you really if you really don't want to become don't want to become biased, therefore you just you report what you have really observed. And one more is, sometimes in order for you not to become biased, you can study several research, you can view several research studies on ethnography on the past. What are the methods that they have published studies on ethnography? What are the methods that they have done in order for them to avoid being biased in their research findings?
Thank you, Dr. Raghuindin. And the next question
Thank you,
from,
Dr. Rodney.
Okay.
Very thorough answers.
Okay.
okay, thank you. Thank you, Mbak Tias. Okay, the next question, oh, nobody raise hand here. Please feel free to ask a question, and it's your opportunities. Okay, Wahyu Adi Kurniawan. Wahyu Adi Kurniawan. Okay, thank you. Muhammad Fajar, maybe you have a question. Oh, nobody. Okay, doctor. I will read on the Google form. Okay. Okay. Nandiko Rizal. Nandiko Rizal. Nandiko Rizal. Please on your camera and ask directly to Dr. Raghuindin. Maybe our student today have a problem with the connection. Okay. Okay. The next question. Octavina.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can I make an additional? I'll give additional answers on the question a while ago. Okay, regarding how to avoid bias, how to maintain objectivity with when conducting qualitative research, particularly ethnography. So one possible way is when you do the coding or when you interpret the results, you do your themes and sub-themes, have multiple people do it. So for example, you have gathered the data. So if you interpret the data, just like what my research students do, when we to maintain objectivity in a qualitative research, the research or the qualitative research data, I will code the data, they will code it. Okay, and they will code, if they are a group of researchers, individually they interpret the data. I will, as an advisor, I will also interpret the data. Then we compare the data later on, the qualitative data. We compare it. So multiple people, we try to triangulate. Multiple people will now will now compare our analysis, our findings on the gathered qualitative data. Okay, what else? Maybe to triangulate your data after creating the themes and the sub-themes, because themes and sub-themes or codes refers to the output of qualitative research. Maybe you can go back to your participants, ask them, did I create the themes and sub-themes? Did I really understand what you have told me? Is this what do you mean when I have asked this particular question? So after analyzing your data, you can go back to your participants, ask them if you have if this is what they really mean in your findings. Or you can also verify with more data sources, okay, and can do peer review, okay, peer review with your co-researchers. Let them analyze your findings. Are their analysis with your findings the same with, or are their analysis the same with your findings? Okay, so I think these are ways based on my experience analyzing qualitative data. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. And we have a question from Mini from ITS. The question is, when we use an experimental research and we wish to have our research precisely, should we compare our result or our method another method from previous study or journal? And if we have to compare, how many methods should we use to compare? Do you have any suggestion for the number of comparison? What is your suggestion regarding this matter? Thank you, Bu Harmini. Bu Harmini, if you want to ask a question directly to Dr. Raghuindin, please open your microphone and open your camera.
I'm sorry, okay. I had a little bit of internet connection problem.
It's okay.
One of the challenges in so yeah, it seems that I was not able to hear the there's a what's the first question? Sorry.
The first question is when we use an experimental research and we wish to have our research precisely, would we compare our research or our method to another method from previous study or journal?
So the question says, when do you use experimental?
Yes, not explain. Should we compare our result or our method to another method from previous study or journal? And if we have to compare the method or research with the other method or the other journal, and if we compare, how many methods should we use to compare? How many methods, Dr. Raghuindin?
Is he or she referring to how many research methods are we going to compare if you have conduct experimental research?
Yes. No information. No information in this question. Okay. Or do you have any suggestion of the number of comparison? If we want to compare how many number, Professor? I mean, Dr. Ragwindin, how many number of the comparison? What is your suggestion? How many number if you want to compare?
So
Number of method, I mean, number of comparison, number of method to compare.
Number of research.
Yes, number of research to compare. If you want to
number
compare
of research methods.
Yes.
Okay.
To compare
So as I've discussed a while ago, we have different research methods. So I think the one stated here is experimental research. If we conduct experimental research.
No information about it, Doctor.
Okay. I think my own understanding about the question is that how many methods of research should you compare?
Yeah.
What's the last part of the question? Kindly repeat it, Miss Imam Mushlihatin. I'm sorry. Okay.
It's okay. It's okay. Because in this question, no information, the method or the research approach in used to Ibu Hermini. Ibu Hermini, if you want to ask directly, please.
Yes. I think it's better if she can ask me directly, so I can do follow-up questions for me to be able to determine what she wants to ask in her question.
Don't worry to consult to Dr. Ragwindin. I think it's now it's very important important opportunity to ask directly, because it's
so
amazing
I can ask follow-up questions to fully understand what she's trying to ask me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And the other question, anybody anyone have question?
My own understanding of that question that was asked a while ago is how many methods should you compare, or it's like I'm sorry, I mean, I'm really having a hard time in understanding the question, but this is what I want to say. When selecting the appropriate research method that you want to use for your study, you should take into consideration the research questions that you want to answer in the first place. So for example, you want to determine whether a particular intervention, a particular medication, a particular intervention or medication is effective, then you resort to experimental study. But if you want to determine the central tendency, the frequency, the incidence, the prevalence of a certain disease, then you try to go with survey studies. If you want to determine the relationship between two variables, then you go with the correlational studies. Okay, so the type of design that you're going to use depends on your research question that you want to answer. Now, I don't know if I have understood the question correctly. I'm sorry.
It's okay because
yes, but if she can ask me directly, it will be better because I can ask follow-up questions, which eventually leads me to understanding what she wants to ask me. Yeah. Is she around? Is she or he? Sorry.
Okay, it's okay, Dr. Ragwindin, because we know information about the question. Okay, the next question from Octavina Kartika Putri. Octavina, can you ask directly? Octavina Kartika Putri. Why the student no active today? Maybe problem with connection. Okay, I will read the question. The question from Octavina Kartika Putri. If we do a mix of qualitative and quantitative research, how do we draw conclusion? Should I combine the two?
Okay, okay. That's really okay. I have understood that particular question very well. Okay.
Okay,
So
thank you.
so her question is, if we do a mixed method research, should we combine the qualitative and quantitative data at the same time, and how do we make a conclusion out of that? Okay. So as I mentioned a while ago, there are many ways, many research design when you conduct mixed method research studies. Okay. The first is the sequential explanatory. In this particular design for mixed method approach, you don't gather the quantitative and qualitative data at the same time, and you don't interpret them at the same time. For sequential explanatory, from the word sequential, it's on sequence. First, you collect quantitative yet. So in sequential explanatory, you gather quantitative data first. After gathering quantitative data, you analyze it. You interpret the results. Okay. After analysis of the quantitative data, for example, they rate, you have conducted a survey, how challenging is online education? They say it's very challenging. They rate 5. 5 means very challenging. You analyze that. After that, you now proceed to the qualitative data. Then you collect qualitative data. You go to these professors who said in the quantitative part of the research, they said online learning is very hard. Then you go back to them. You conduct your interview. So you ask them, why did you say that it's very hard? So that's qualitative research already. You interview them, why do they say that online teaching is very hard? You conduct an interview. Out of their responses in your interview, you again do your own analysis. Okay, so as you can see in that particular design, your sequential explanatory, you don't combine the qualitative and the quantitative design at the same time. You collect the quantitative first, you analyze it, then you make your conclusion, then you collect it, then you do your interview, you collect qualitative, then out of that you make an analysis solely or exclusively for qualitative data, then you go with your conclusion. That's sequential explanatory. You don't combine them at the same time. You don't analyze the data at the same time. You don't collect qualitative and quantitative data at the same time, but you rather, it's phase by phase. There's a phase for collecting and analyzing qualitative data. There's another phase of collecting and analyzing quantitative data. That's for sequential mixed method design. Now, for concurrent means it is a type of research design under mixed method wherein concurrent, which means you gather quantitative data and you gather qualitative data at the same time. Okay, but how do you make your own, in concurrent triangulation, how do you make your conclusions out of that? In concurrent triangulation, you make your conclusion like this. Okay, for example, you ask, you do a survey. How do people, or what's the quality of life of people during the COVID-19 pandemic? So quantitative data, they will say it's very hard. The quality of life is very hard during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's quantitative data. So you analyze that. At the same time, in concurrent triangulation, while doing the survey, you also observe them if what they are answering in the survey is really happening. For example, they say that it's very hard to live in the COVID-19 pandemic era, but you triangulate it, you make your own analysis, you make your own observation. Is what they have answered in the survey really is what I am observing, that they are really having their quality of life is very hard. So you triangulate, you gather it at the same time, then you make your own conclusion. Okay, so it depends on the design. Okay, if the design says it's sequential, you collect and analyze data at different phases of the study. You gather quantitative first, then you analyze it, then followed up by gathering qualitative data, then you analyze it. So that's sequential. But if you go with the concurrent research design for mixed method, it is by that time that you gather and collect and analyze data, do your conclusions at the same time for both qualitative and quantitative data. So it depends on the design.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Can I add an answer to that? My answers. Okay. Sometimes you do interviews, right? You do surveys. Now the good thing with mixed method is sometimes when you do a survey, it's very difficult to create an instrument, a survey instrument, in order to be used to gather data for survey studies. One technique is you resort to mixed method. For example, you want to determine the challenges of professors teaching online. So how will you know the challenges if you won't ask them first? So in order for you to create a research instrument about the challenges in online teaching, you first do an interview, qualitative research. You ask them what are the challenges. Then you enumerate them. After enumerating them, put them in your questionnaire. Okay, so you now have a questionnaire, and this questionnaire is based on what the professors have answered during the interview part of your mixed method research.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Any question for the last time? Okay, maybe Niam Rosyadi. Okay. Okay, no, thank you, Doctor, for your very nice lecture, amazing lecture today. And unfortunately, time is up. And before closing, I would like to resume our lecture activity today from Dr. Rodney Adesan Raguindin's lecture. We know there are different between research approach, research methods, and research design. Yeah, we must know the difference of this research. Yeah, okay. I would like to thank you, Dr. Rodney Adesan Raguindin, for your lecture, and that give us important information and inspiration. Thank you, Doctor. And thank you for all participants.
Thank you very much, also.
Okay, thank you for all participants for the discussion. And I'm sorry if they are inconvenient during this lecture. And we come back to Miss Dania. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodney, for the excellent lecture and Q&A session today. And thank you, Ms. Verdato, for moderating this amazing session. Please give applause to our speaker and moderator by using the Zoom reaction feature for today's amazing session. And then we would like to present a certificate awarding for our honorable speaker and moderator. This is the certificate presented for Dr. Rodney as our today's speaker. And the next. For Ms. Verdato as our today's moderator. Once again, thank you very much to our speaker and moderator for your availability on today's session. Before we wrap up the session, we would like to invite all participants as well as our honorable speaker and moderator to have a group photo. For participants, please turn on the camera. Okay. Everyone's ready? We will start in 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have finished the group photo. For the participants, please fill the feedback form through the link that you can see on the Zoom chat room. We want to remind you, participant who will get the certificate is the participant who come on this time. Join this event until the end and fill the feedback form. Before we part, I would like to inform you that we still have several future agendas in R2SEP for Sciences stream. You can see it on poster we are showing you right now, or you can check it out on ITS Global Engagement website later. We will see you in the next session on 11 November 2021. Also, we would like to let you know about a great opportunity for postgraduate students to join an international conference, IPSCON, where you can get experience and network with global scholars. You can check the details on our website. The registration for research presentation and also 3-minute thesis competition is still open until tomorrow. So please register immediately. Thank you. And finally, we have reached the end of today's researcher and research student engagement program, and we sincerely apologize for any mistakes we may have made in presenting as master ceremony and committee. Thank you very much to our speaker, moderator, and all participants for the attention and cooperation. Once again, thank you very much and good afternoon. Allow me to end the meeting in 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.